Ever wonder how a big new idea actually gets born? I mean, how do we as a society change our minds about really fundamental stuff like government or money or even reality itself? Well, it's almost never a single eureka moment. Instead, it's more like a series of epic battles. So today we're diving into this incredible concept, the school of thought.
Right, so how do new ideas come into being? Well, here's the thing we're going to explore. Ideas are almost never born in a vacuum. Nope, they show up, they fight it out, and they evolve inside these powerful frameworks. You could almost call them intellectual tribes that completely shape how we see the world. And the official term for these tribes is a school of thought. At its heart, it's just a shared perspective. It's a bunch of people who look at the world and kind of nod and say, yep, that's how it works. They agree on the basic rules of the game, whether they're talking about philosophy or art or quantum physics. This is the bedrock idea for our whole conversation today. So why do we even do this? Why bother forming these intellectual tribes? Well, honestly, it's one of the main ways we humans make sense of a ridiculously complex world. It's how we organize what we know so we can build on it instead of starting from scratch every single time. And you want to know what's really fascinating? The timing. These new schools of thought, they don't usually pop up when everything's calm and peaceful. No way. They tend to explode onto the scene during times of incredible chaos and upheaval, right when the old answers just aren't cutting it anymore, and people are desperate for a new map of reality.
And if you want the perfect example of this, look no further than ancient China and the period known as the 100 Schools of Thought. I mean, the name says it all. This wasn't some quiet debate club. It was an absolute firestorm of competing ideas, born directly out of turmoil.
You see, this whole intellectual explosion didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened right in the middle of the Warring States period, which was, to put it mildly, a total mess. We're talking centuries of constant warfare, political breakdown, just chaos. And it was inside this pressure cooker that thinkers like Confucius and the legalists had to come up with some answers, fast.
So Confucius looked at all this chaos and said, okay, the solution is order, it's ethics. His big idea, Confucianism, was that society could heal itself if everyone just understood their place and acted accordingly. You know, if a ruler acts like a proper ruler and a subject acts like a proper subject, harmony will return. It's all about restoring balance through social roles. But then you add the legalists, who had a much darker take on things. They thought human nature was just fundamentally selfish. End of story. So forget all that talk about ethics and harmony. For them, the only way to keep society from tearing itself apart was through absolute top-down power and super strict, brutally enforced laws. The state was everything. And then, as a totally different alternative, you had Taoism. The Taoists basically rejected both of those approaches. They said, forget trying to fix society or control the state. The real answer to chaos was for each individual to just get in tune with the natural flow of the universe, the Tao. It was a complete inward turn. Now let's jump forward and see how these same kinds of debates are still playing out today. Because these battles of ideas are not just ancient history. They have massive real-world consequences right now, especially in the world of economics. The school of thought that wins the economic debate directly shapes government policy, and that affects every single one of us. When you look at the story of modern economics, it's like a family tree that splits right down the middle. On one side, you have this whole branch of classical schools of thought. And on the other, you have the Keynesian schools. And for the last century, these two great intellectual tribes have been battling for control. And their core disagreement is actually pretty simple. Classical economics basically says, leave it alone. The market works best when the government keeps its hands off. An invisible hand will guide everything to the most efficient outcome. But Keynesian economics, which really came out of the Great Depression, says, no way. It argues that the government must actively intervene, especially during a crisis, to spend money and manage the economy to keep it from collapsing. All right, so this dynamic isn't just for things like philosophy or economics. We see the exact same kind of clash happening at the absolute cutting edge of science, as physicists try to figure out the very fabric of reality itself, space-time. So the huge quest to unite gravity with quantum mechanics, called quantum gravity, is basically split into two giant camps. You have the top-down approach, which includes famous ideas like string theory. They start with a beautiful fundamental theory and try to prove that our universe comes from it. But then you have the bottom-up school, and their idea is way wilder. They ask, what if space-time isn't fundamental at all? What if it's just something that emerges from something even more basic?
This quote from the physicist B.L. Hu just nails the idea. He's saying, look, Einstein's theory of general relativity, our best map of gravity, it isn't the final answer. It's just the hydrodynamics. It describes the large-scale behavior of spacetime, but not what it's actually made of at the tiniest levels. Here's the analogy, and it's a great one. Think of spacetime like an ocean. General relativity is incredible at describing the waves, the tides, the big currents, the large-scale stuff. But it tells you absolutely nothing about the individual H2O molecules that make up the water. This school of thought says there must be some kind of atoms of spacetime, and we just haven't discovered them yet.
And if you follow that idea to its conclusion, it gets really mind-bending. Because if our spacetime is just an emergent state, then the Big Bang might not have been a creation out of nothing. It might have been a phase transition, like steam condensing into water or water freezing into ice. Our entire universe could just be one state of matter that froze out of a hotter, crazier, pre-existing reality. Wild, right?
Okay, so we've seen these epic battles between huge warring schools in philosophy, economics, and physics. But here's a question. Is this model still true for every field of knowledge? Or is the way we organize ideas starting to change?
Well, this comment from someone on an academic psychology forum gives us a clue. It suggests that in some areas, the old days of big monolithic isms, like Freudianism versus behaviorism, are pretty much over. Something new is taking its place. And you can see why. Just look at a field like psychology today. It's not one big thing anymore. It is fractured into all these hyper-specialized little sub-schools. A social psychologist and a neuroscientist might both be studying human behavior, but their tools, their questions, and their theories are so different that they're basically living in separate intellectual worlds. The knowledge has become fragmented. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? From ancient Chinese philosophers to modern physicists to the very structure of our universities, what can we learn from these great battles of ideas? Well, it seems like the form of how we organize ideas changes over time, but the basic need stays the same. We went from these giant, all-encompassing philosophical systems in the ancient world to these huge dueling paradigms in the modern era, and now to these tiny, specialized subfields. But at every stage, we're still just trying to build frameworks to help us tackle our biggest questions. And that leaves us with one last massive question for our own time. In an age of artificial intelligence that can process more data than any human ever could, and an information landscape that feels more chaotic than ever, what will the next schools of thought even look like? What will the intellectual tribes of the future be fighting about?